Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
So we've got a guest joining us. We have Mr. Cody. He is hanging out and licking my hand right now. He's going to be in this conversation with us today.
Yeah, because we're just kind of like sitting on the land, just chilling out like we normally do, and just chit-chatting. And Cody's been standing here with us for like 10 minutes, and
our horses love us.
And Willow is only about 25 feet away. She's grazing, enjoying her time as well. But anyways,
what are we talking about today?
So I thought of an idea of just, I don't know, something that's been coming up a lot lately is just relationships. I mean, all of them, like human to human, horse to human,
horse to horse,
horse to horse, just the term relationship in general. And I think more specifically the way horses have helped me, I feel like anyway, become at minimum more aware in my relationships with humans and with other species as well. So I kind of just thought we would talk about some of that a little bit and kind of share some things about horses and relationship.
I like it.
Yeah.
So I guess to start this a little bit, I feel like I've got a pretty solid, close relationship with now both of our horses. And it's pretty amazing to be out with them, you know, with them grazing, and they come up to us when called, and I mean, completely off the halter. There's no tack or anything. We have treats, but they're not coming up to us for the treats, as they do know how to ask for treats.
Right.
And most of the time they come up and like put their heads in our chest and ask us to pet them.
Yeah.
I feel like they're essentially relationship counselors, I feel like, for us and, you know, our friends and our families and ourselves. I mean,
when you said that, my eyes just kind of like lit up because, you know, I've gone through a bit of counseling in my life with different professionals, and it blows my mind like how effective horses specifically are in helping humans become aware and develop their relationships in a good way.
Well, yeah, because for those of you listening who maybe don't have a horse, or, you know, thinking about having them, or simply just enjoy them, we have found that being with them, they actually mirror our energy to the point where if you're in a bad mood, they're going to be in a bad mood too, and they help us be aware of our emotions and how we're feeling, and I feel like they could actually help us understand how our relationships are with our family, even if we are unaware of it. And an example of this is, you know, say I got in a fight with my mom a week ago, and they sense that tension, and maybe while my mom may not be out here with us, the horses can help me, and have helped me before, come to terms with what's going on and forgive myself and her without having to, you know, carry on the conversation and get to the point where, hey, Mom, I forgive you for this, that, and the other reason.
Right. So they're just, if I'm hearing that correctly, they're kind of like a conduit for you to process your emotions in private.
Yeah.
And then kind of circle back to the people who are, you know, you might be experiencing a little bit of tension with, and they become just really good, in my mind, masters of relationship, and they are so genuine about it in ways that I don't think people just kind of naturally understand. I mean, this comes after at least a couple years of like spending quality time with them. And so one of the things that I've kind of had a problem with myself is that I would say probably at least the past 6 months or so, I feel like more connected with horse than I do with many humans in my life.
I feel the same way.
And I've actually come and heard, like, I think again on Warwick Schiller's Journey On podcast. I think that's where I've heard some people mention that sort of idea as well. And it's just because, to me, they're so calming in that way. And they're open to allowing us to kind of free flow our energy, and they absorb it very well. And I think it's reciprocal. So we absorb their energy and emotions as well. So it's like this symbiotic relationship, if you will, where we help them and they help us. I think they help us better than we help them most times, but
I feel like in a lot of ways it's like subconscious that we help them, even just by virtue of being around them. And I say this, I mean, I'm going to go to a training example that I had with Willow just yesterday. She was struggling and going back to her pen, and I had her off the halter, and I feel like it's all about meeting them where they are, just like you should do, or how I understand it. It's mutual to meet your other half or your other family member, your other friend, where they are in your relationship. So anyways, I asked Willow, how about let's go back to your pen? And she just kind of told me, I don't need to. I want to keep grazing, and met her where she was. Okay, how about you get a couple more bites, and then let's go and stand on the mat. And I'm almost certain she understands that, as she looked at me excited and walked with me. And so I gathered it as she was telling me, I don't want you to leave me when I get in my pen. I don't really want to go in my pen. Now, if you want to do something with me in my pen, I will go with you. And that's exactly what we did. We spent about 10 minutes doing some extra training, and I met her where she's at. And that, just yesterday's session helped me a lot with meeting my younger sister, my stepmom, and even my dad where they are in their days and in our relationship.
It's really interesting. I can't say that I've perfected by any stretch of the imagination it's kind of like, in my mind, it's kind of like meditation. So meditation is real cool, and I practice meditation usually on the daily, at least for 5 to 10 minutes a day. And here's the thing about that, like it's really easy to be mindful when you take time away from everything else that's going on, and you like find a place in nature, which is really easy for us to do on our property, and plug into that and get quiet by yourself. It's really easy to do that. But I've had so many moments where I'll do that, and then I'll walk back into real life, if you will, and some irritation comes up, or I get heated about this, that, or another thing, and it's like that mindfulness practice kind of gets thrown out the window. I don't feel like horses are... I don't feel like they operate that way. It's like they're continually in the present moment. And so... again, on Warwick Schiller's Journey On podcast, which I keep plugging that, but I listen to it a lot, and I really enjoy it. So if you guys haven't listened to that podcast, go and do a search for it. It's called Journey On. And he mentioned this quote, and I don't know who the original author of the quote was. I think he mentioned, an ancient Chinaman from like 800 BC or something, if I remember correctly. But it was something like, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you're at peace, you're living in the present. And I I take that quote and I kind of do this inventory of where I'm at any given time, especially like when I focus on, thinking about that quote, and like, it really helps me like, okay, if I'm not at peace, then I'm either living in the past or the future. And how does that play out with regard to relationships? What I've found and what the horses have taught me in that way is the less that we are present, the less we can have a very good relationship with anything.
That's a good point that you make there. And I feel like that's very true. And I feel like we have experienced that firsthand.
In other words, being anxious or depressed is ultimately a killer of relationship in my way of understanding and thinking about it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up there, and that I feel like we've all kind of experienced a little bit of both in our family. I mean, we've definitely had our moments of being anxious, being, sad, depressed, kind of like this is never going to get done kind of thing. But again, I feel like the horses are really good about letting us know where we are, and in that, and I don't know, kind of communicating to us and allowing us again to check ourselves so we can check our relationships. I feel like, having a relationship, whether it's with a horse, with a dog, another human, I feel like it's important, and it's a requirement for us as humans. Like you mentioned yesterday, we are herd animals, and we do, even us that are extroverted, we do gravitate toward having a relationship with other people, even if it's just that few. Now, I kind of want to dig a little deeper into the horses and their relationships with themselves, because they're pretty amazing. You've been out here with them, just kind of watching R2. And what do you observe when they're out by themselves, together, and their relationship dynamic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The biggest thing I observe is them being present all the time, and it's an interesting concept as I've listened to and read about and kind of explored more about mammals and herd mammals and the dynamic of that, and specifically when it comes to horses, they are mammals and they are prey animals, and so at the core, they have to be present. Otherwise, it's very basic aspect of it. Like, if they aren't present, they'll get eaten.
Yeah. And
so they don't have the capacity, call it via evolution or just how or adaptation or whatever, from over the time that they've been on the earth, if they don't maintain awareness, they die in the wild. And that's not to say like I haven't seen them get caught off guard, and in fact, the way I understand it is in horses, when they're developing rank or pecking order, so to speak, within the herd, a horse will generally gain rank by catching another horse off guard who's higher in rank. And they don't necessarily have this sort of like drive for power and control as we humans do. I think that's, in just my opinion, that's largely a function of our frontal cortex and thinking brain. That's just how I don't know if that's right scientifically, but that's just how I kind of understand it in my mind. And so basically when a horse loses rank to another horse, the way I understand it, they're like okay with it. They don't like necessarily, it's kind of like martial arts, the way I understand it. Like you don't use your martial art unless it's like the last resort, right? Like you got to use it, otherwise you're going to die. And I feel like horses are that way when it comes to their relationships and even their hierarchy within the herd. It's like they will fight, but they don't just go out and fight and pick a fight. That's not their natural. And in fact, I've since learned that from people who have observed horses in the wild that the fighters are not necessarily the true leaders of the herd. And in fact, it's more so like the calm, sort of quiet, not passive, but leadership style. Doesn't mean like going and punching somebody in the face.
Yeah.
It's more about having tact and discipline and focus and empathy, even with your enemy.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah, my observation of just watching our small two horse herd with 2 humans has been that they remain present almost always, and when they don't, it's a quick correction by the other horses around them, and then they get in that present moment and all is well.
Yeah. Have you realized, like, in trying to call them up to us, that if your brain is filled with whatever your brain is carrying around, they actually tend to ignore you?
Oh yeah, or they in our situation, because we don't have fence line everywhere, and even if we do, they'll bottom out at the fence, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like it's like their flight response kicks in. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like you're in a bad mood and I don't have to be around it, so I'm not going to. Like that sort of thing.
Yeah, they
whereas like this morning's a perfect example where I just decided like I'm in a good mood this morning, but not like the best mood, like I've got a lot on my mind and a lot of like tasks and a lot of stuff that I'm working through and internally, and I decided instead of like trying to put that at bay, I just kind of like leave it out, but then pick a place and let the horses be. And so it's kind of their turnout time, but instead of like walking or having some sort of focus on like what we're doing, just kind of like following them around.
Yeah, and observing them.
And just being with them.
Yeah.
And so I picked a spot to sit down on the land while they're grazing. And what happened as a result of that?
Well,
just before you came out, it's like, so Willow is like in the present, like close by, but then I would say my horse, Cody, came right over to me, and he's just like in my space and wants to be there and wants to be around me, and he's mirroring that sort of softness that I had intention about delivering, if that makes sense. So instead of letting my internal turmoil bubble up into a frustrating energy, I instead just sort of decided to be present and calm. And it's like a magnet. It just attracts them over, and they're like, wow. And so to get to your point on, if we're coming out to catch them, so to speak, and we're just like, we've got to catch them because we got something else to do. We got to get them back. It's taken me longer to get them to follow suit that way than if I'm really present and calm and collected myself, where in those situations, I don't even have to ask. They just, like magnets, come over.
Yeah.
And that's magnetism. And that permeates through, like, every aspect of relationship with every species, including our own human-to-human relationships. The question I have for you, Alyssa, is how do we perfect that? Or actually get closer to perfection? Because I feel like I'm really weak on that. Like, I feel like I understand the construct of it, but I don't understand how to, like, actually consistently do really well in that regard.
Well, I feel like it takes practice. I mean, I don't think there's any one particular person who's a expert at it. I feel like there are people who, you know, like the trust techniques, James French, he's the founder of the trust technique, or one of them.
Co-founder, yeah.
He, I would say, is pretty close to mastering the whole, you know, present moment, and he seems to have a really good relationship with his clients and his animals that he works with. But
yeah, so
he also took a lot of time to, you know, put the course together and learn and, you know, trial and error.
And probably years even before getting to that point.
Yeah.
I think how that technique originated, if I understand right, they were working with colicky infants, human infants, and which resonates with me because you are a very colicky infant. But even I can reflect in my own way all the way back to, you know, 16 years ago. And there was a lot of, like, negative energy that I had just as a human being, and that pours out in relationship even to an infant. And I'm not saying like it was directed toward you, but heck, there was just a lot going on and a lot of stress around that, even being like a new parent and those sort of things. I'm not saying like I caused you to be colicky. It's just I'm curious as to, and I think you probably remember like when you were like 2 or 3 years old or whatever, and you would have like some meltdowns. And I think you mentioned like, or can you talk about that a little bit? Like how I would interact with you in that way? Because I think it's really relevant.
Yeah, my dad and I have been really close, I think since before I came out of the womb. Just gonna throw that out there. My mom and I, however, have kind of always been at it with each other. I don't ever remember how I would shut down, but it always seemed to be, like, because of something she said or did or, you know, whatever. Like, she started it, and that's how I felt, you know, at that young age. And again, I can't remember how it started, but I do remember, you know, being in my room, and who would walk through the door at after he got home from work? Yep, my dad, with a warm washcloth, and he'd come and sit down at my level, and very softly, as if he was talking to some sort of like thing with huge ears and could hear him from, you know, a mile away, and he'd just whisper, "What's going on?" In just this soft, like, calming voice. And I feel like I would just like and it was calming, and so I would be able to explain what would go on as he would wipe my eyes with this warm washcloth. And like he always just had this way of understanding like what he needed to do to help at any given moment, which was really cool because like I don't feel like I have that. I feel like that's like a natural parent instinct. And maybe he was scared out of his mind. I don't know. Were you scared out of your mind when I screamed like that?
A lot of times, yeah. And like, and for the record, I don't feel like I was always that calm and collected with you.
I feel like quite frequently you were, though.
I do, looking back, I do remember those times. And I also believe that is indicative of a good parenting relationship between both parents. When, there's some difficulty a child is having with one parent and the other parent's able to come in and provide some backup, if you will, some reinforcement, not from like a belligerent standpoint, but just like to help calm things down. And so in that way, I think your mom and I did quite well with that. And it requires effort on everybody's part. But yeah, I mean, I think the parenting relationship alone is scary as hell. Like it scares me even to this day, and arguably, at least in the way of like you and Jacob, I mean, you both are like quickly approaching adulthood or age of majority or whatever you want to call it. And so my role for you both has changed drastically over the past few years, by design. I become more of like a coach and a mentor than that typical do this, don't do this instructional parent figure. But yeah, I remember those times, and I think for you and I, it created a very solid foundation for our relationship. And not to say that we haven't had our, moments of growing apart or having weakness in relationship, but we have such a foundation in that way that we're able to work through those situations when they arise. And I think what I'm getting at there is, like, again, horses to me are masters of that.
Yeah.
And they really exhibit like the tools and the learning abilities for us to gain those skills and put those tools in our toolbox and to enable us to use that in our human to human interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're awesome. I feel like in a lot of ways, like, and I'm not a parent, but you've talked a lot about, kind of, it's a very similar feeling that you have with Cody that you do with your kids.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So, and I mean, with Willow and even, my previous horse, my first horse, Mocha, it's always a sense of, like, I want to protect them as much as I can. But I also want her to learn and come to me when she needs help. And I want her to see me as a leader and somebody who she trusts, when she has her difficult times in her life.
And I think what you just said there is like the epitome of what most every, if not every single human parent wants with regard to their children. But there's kind of like this old school idea. You may have heard it before, like stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, sort of mentality. Where I kind of recall it like in my, I'm 40 years old, and like I kind of remember similar styles of that, if not in my own life with my own parents. I definitely know it existed, and like this sort of like toughen up mentality and failure to, or like inability to like release emotion and let emotions be. And I think at the heart and soul of like relationship, especially when it comes to like parent to children, what we really desire is that really connected relationship where, it's free flowing and it is based on unconditional love and empathy and appreciation. And so as you entered teenage life, that's a scary thing for parents because, we all know, like, teenagers, I think we collectively as humans, we treat teenagers horribly, because the way it comes about for me is like, we in the early years, largely, in raising a child, it's like, do this, don't do this. If you do this, there might be punishment. If you do this, there might be reward. And then it's like teenagers get to teenage years and it's like, you should know all this, but we discount the fact that in your adolescent time of life, like, there's so many internal changes going on, just scientifically developing. Your brain's developing, your body's developing, it's growing. There's hormonal changes, chemical changes, all throughout your body and mind. And then we have this expectation that teenagers are just supposed to do and be like productive members of society at that point, and like not really need a whole lot.
Yeah, well, I read this thing this one time. I can't remember where I read it, where I saw it, but it was pretty much talking about the fact that teenagers as a whole are a lot of times like neglected in what their body needs. And this website was talking about how, if schools could start later in the day last maybe a little shorter, but cram things in, or last longer during the year to cram everything in, so that the teenagers could get more sleep that they needed. Because it explains how when you go through adolescence and your teenage years, you need a lot more. Your body burns a lot more calories. You need a lot more sleep. On top of learning and school, maybe you're starting a job and you're starting to, get more in tune with what's going on with the world than you ever did when you were little. There's a lot on top of, your body doing its changes, puberty and everything else that comes with being a teenager. Right. We need the extra sleep. And it kind of proved this, a lot of teenagers are, can be, I guess, grouchy, so to speak, because of the lack of sleep and everything else that they need that they just don't have because school or work or this and that don't allow it.
It's interesting you bring that up, and I'm familiar with that that study or whatever. There's probably multiple studies around that, and it's just like we're not. Like, we're kind of disregarding like what the needs are, and it's real similar to that infant, or that young child's like, stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about. Like, or the infant who's colicky, like, just leave them be in the crib and like let them cry it out. They'll work through it. And I didn't really ever try to do that when you were upset, but there were times when you were colicky, like as a baby, as an infant, like newborn, really, within the first like few months of your life, where there was like absolutely no way to console you. And that's a scary place to be as a new parent, because like you don't get like instructions really for stuff like that, and there is a level of like trauma associated with it, because for both the baby and the parent, where as the parent you feel so helpless, And I think at those early stages, I don't have like the science or the backing for any of this. This is just kind of like the way I feel about it. Like, I think those early stages ultimately create a blueprint or a template, if you will, for the rest of the relationship. And it's not to say that it's like set in stone and can't change for better or worse as the years go on. But I think a lot of times, like, parents will kind of have one of those mentalities of like, stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about, or I'm just going to let you cry it out and like leave you to your own devices. And it's, from what I understand, like quite opposite from what like our ancestors did. Like a lot of like cultures all around the world in the early stages of humanity, the family unit was much more cohesive than it is now. So like babies and like, I mean, there was like even communal sleeping, and that was just a function largely about like how the living quarters were established and stuff like that. But infants didn't have a crib necessarily where they were just kind of put in and left to cry alone. Like the whole kind of family unit embraced that, the way I understand it anyway. And then they had these like rites of passage ceremonies, and a lot of cultures, indigenous cultures that exist today still have those. But largely like in our Western modern societies, we don't have rites of passage, really. I mean, we don't go through ceremonial coming of age. And so a lot of teenagers, it seems, they're kind of just like left to their own devices to kind of push through all the changes and things going on. And then it's like collectively as adults, when that teen hits 18 years old, it's like, okay, flip the switch. Now you're an adult. Now you go do everything you need to do and be a productive member of society. And there's like a huge gap of missing stuff there. And sometimes that could even present itself a lot earlier on in the teenager's life. And so you could, 12, 13, 14 years old and start to have, mental health issues and these types of things where, I don't know, where may not necessarily have needed to be that direction, just with a little bit of focus, difficult stuff.
Yeah. I feel like
hard to get right. And, even as a parent, as those words kind of flow out of my mouth, I'm like, well, even our situation hasn't been perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's ever true like perfection. We can try our hardest to perfect things, but I don't think we could ever truly perfect them. To the best of our ability, we can, but and a lot of times that is enough. But it's never. I mean, our world isn't perfect. We're not perfect.
And don't the horses just exhibit that?
Yeah, and I mean, they're not perfect either.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I mean, being a 16-year-old girl, it's rough. And I mean, I'm going through it all as we speak. I feel like the horses have been a really cool kind of escape almost, but I also feel like there's a certain level of understanding that they have. I mean, they experience their own things. I mean, going from, a foal to a yearling where their mama stops babying them, they have to start protecting themselves in the wild. Willow went through it all.
Yeah.
She's estimated to be about seven years old, according to our veterinarian, and she was a foal at one time. She had a mama who protected her, and she went through a time in her life where she kind of had to start learning how to become a productive member of her herd, and learning how to protect herself. And I believe that she's foaled before. There's no real evidence to back that up yet, but I mean, I believe that she's had to learn how to protect and teach her own children or her own child. Willow has gone through a lot of trauma, and quite frankly, so have I. And we're still healing together. I'm really thankful that we have the ability to have met each other, and we get to live together and go through our difficulties together, because honestly, given both of our ages and what has happened to us both in the past, I mean, we've gone through a lot, and they're helping each other on a daily basis. She's my closest friend, and she's like I don't know, they're quite amazing, because they just exert this really calm energy, and they're non-biased, which is really amazing. I mean, I feel like they're one of the only creature that's like completely non-biased. Like they have no one side.
Yeah.
And given,
like, to me, they're like in constant equilibrium.
yeah, and given, I mean, Willow,
and even if they get out of equilibrium for a moment, it's like really quick for them to redirect and get back into it.
they crave, and I think so do we, but we don't see it as much as they do. They crave the calm.
Yeah.
And they take
crave the calm.
Yeah.
That's like
they take the path of least resistance always. But I mean, Willow was a Mustang. She once roamed the green grasslands of White River, Nevada. I mean, they're like royalty out there, you know? They get to do whatever the heck they want with no rules or whatever. I mean, her and her family were captured.
Well, I would say I don't agree with that. There are plenty of rules in the wild.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as a herd, but it's a lot more free-flowing, I feel like, than having them in domestication.
I get
where
I get what
they
you
don't
mean.
have to be in a pen. They get to graze on the grass that fits them. I feel like they probably got to swim in the biggest lakes, and I mean, I have this fantasy going of what kind of life Willow lived before me.
Right.
But I mean, she was captured, but I mean, I don't feel like she holds any grudges. Maybe because she's a horse and she doesn't quite understand what happened, but maybe she does. I mean, yeah. I don't really know how much she quite understands what happened when she got captured.
But yet, from a relational standpoint, she's constantly demonstrating her willingness and ability to be present.
Yeah, and heal.
And heal.
And she doesn't hold grudges.
And to be in that way of equilibrium with herself and others. It's fascinating.
It's amazing.
And to that, I think we can wrap up right there and just say, you know, horses mirror to me what a perfect relationship looks like.
And I feel like
that doesn't mean perfection.
I feel like they rely on us for that assistance too.
Yeah.
I feel like they're a lot better than we are at maintaining a healthy relationship, but I feel like we help them in a lot of ways in that way to, I mean, we kind of provide some conflict in their life.
Right.
And
that's an interesting.
I feel like and I mean, they can potentially provide some conflict in our lives, but I feel like collectively as a horse and human, we figure out how to work that out and communicate and help each other understand that it's all about communication, not control on both ends.
Very cool.
So,
well, hey everybody, we really appreciate you listening, and in that listening, you're really supporting us. Naturally, this is just kind of a fun thing for Alyssa and I to do, to sit down and we've been talking a lot since we've had horses over the past few years. And as we've mentioned before, we started the podcast. It just was like we had these conversations, and they mean a lot to us, and they help us kind of flesh out details of our own life. And if you are listening, I would love, like, if you enjoy it, if you don't enjoy it, if maybe this is your first time listening and you're like, this is probably my last time listening. I don't know. Shoot us an email, podcast@reinforcethehorse.com. We see the analytics in our podcasting platform, that, you know, our downloads are growing and people are listening. We don't know if you're robots. We don't know if you're human. We don't know if you're horses. I mean, just shoot us an email, podcast@reinforcethehorse.com. It doesn't have to be long. We'd love to hear from you and to get an idea as to what you think and if you like the show, what you'd like to see us do differently and whatnot.
Yeah. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Have a great day.